This video is brought to you by Surfshark. Stick around to hear more about the discount that they're providing to the entire upper echelon community. Okay, today's video is about the simulation genre, and more specifically, EmergeNYC. A bit of backstory here, I had never heard about this game personally until an email came through my inbox from what appeared to be a throwaway address, as in the person, I believe, wanted to stay anonymous, which prompted me to take a look after it discussed the idea of stolen material, flipped assets, and violated copyright. After a couple days of catching up on other projects, I was finally able to dive in, and here's what I found. A multi-million-dollar Steam game that possibly steals from, I want to say, 24 companies, give or take, including Rockstar, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Seagrave, FSC, the Federal Signal Corporation, Capital One, KME, and a whole bunch more. Let's begin with some background. EmergeNYC is an emergency response simulation title on Steam with 2,600 reviews, altogether achieving a mixed rating. The game is developed by FlipSwitch Games and costs $25. It was released in 2016 and became widely embraced as one of the better simulation titles for emergency response fans if you were willing to overlook some rough edges here and there. Originally conceived around 2010, perhaps even earlier, I'm not sure, the game had two phases of crowdfunding that included both Kickstarter and Indiegogo. The Kickstarter took place in June of 2014 and successfully raised $13,000 compared to a $10,000 target. Over the next 2 years, a game would materialize, and eventually, in late 2016, it launched on Steam under the title of Early Access. This was met with good results, it honestly was, and I'll talk later about the potential revenue from this title, but less than 2 months prior to this release, September of 2016, a new crowdfunding goal was put forward, this time on Indiegogo, for $100,000, of which $44,000 was raised. That's a bit of a strange timeline, at least in my opinion, because $100,000 of crowdfunded capital, from their goal at least, less than 2 months away from the actual Steam release of the game, would indicate I don't even really know. It spurs the question, it frankly requires the question, why wouldn't they just wait until the game released on Steam and see what the response was, instead of crowdfunding 10 times their previous goal a couple of months before the actual launch, but years after they had first started, and presumably after the game was largely or fully constructed. To me, it's a strange origin story. It really is, but that's just the beginning. November of 2016, the game goes live and quickly starts to rack up sales. Based on a rudimentary estimate according to a PC Games study and calculated by Simon Carless, one can reasonably assume between 58 and 63 copies sold per singular public Steam review. And this number actually increases dramatically pre-2017, and the game launched in 2016, but for the sake of math, we can leave it at around 60. Assuming 60 sales on average per review, that's 60 copies of the game sold per public review, that would mean a ballpark estimate of 160,000 copies when multiplied against the 2,600 reviews that we currently see. At a $25 price point, that's $4 million, and this is obviously an extremely rough calculation, but it starts to put things in perspective that the game absolutely did make money and was certainly financially beneficial to its creators. It's a tiny development team that made the title on a shoestring budget, keep that in mind. Alright, now for the sponsor, and this time that sponsor is Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN provider who has partnered up with the channel to provide a valuable service and a discount on that service in the process. Surfshark's VPN service, also known as a virtual private network, offers a number of different things. First, and incredibly important in the modern digital era, it can bypass regional censorship by flipping your geographic location. Additionally, it will help you circumvent country-specific licensing contracts, which means access to more shows on a website like Netflix, just as one example. And expanding even further, you can protect yourself from nefarious third-party data harvesting, which happens on a daily basis. VPNs are designed to protect the entire online browsing experience. There are many more benefits to using a VPN, but for the sake of time, I'll leave it there. I'm happy to say that Surfshark is offering 83% off and 4 full months free if you click the link down below in the description using promo code Echelon. Again, that's 83% off and 4 full months free using the link down below and code Echelon. Big thank you to them for sponsoring the channel. Okay, knowing some history, we can really dig in and discuss the developers behind the project, FlipSwitch Games. FlipSwitch is a very small team, mostly consisting of 3 core developers. This was learned from their Indiegogo page way down at the bottom. One of those developers is Rafael Fernandez, 21 years old at the time. Rafael is the founder and CEO of FlipSwitch Games, and also has previous mod work in the EmergeNYC series, spearheading one mod in particular called Brooklyn Borough of Fire. Notice in this particular post how he references Seagraves. This mod was largely supported in 2014, 2 years before EmergeNYC would hit the Steam store, but in 2015, after the successful funding of EmergeNYC had taken place, there were some bumps in the road. Modders are some of the most talented and dedicated people in the entire gaming world, and much of what they do is entirely for free. That's great for me, a player, it's great for everybody else who plays the games and loves them, and it's great for other modders who want to build on a foundation that is always expanding. But proper credit is an extremely important thing in that world. In 2015, Brooklyn Borough of Fire was accused of mass plagiarism and copyright theft. One of the contributors, Dyson, posted a massive list of asset sources after this happened, but even after that had been done, there were many more instances that came into question, and the mod was eventually banned from the platform. One of the administrators, Newfound King, said, quote, "Serious accusations of theft have occurred, and based on the evidence we have, there is strong reason to believe these accusations. We would like to remind the community that we take such accusations very seriously and deal with them as such. You wouldn't want your hard work sold as someone else's. Why let others do the same?" End quote. This resulted in Dyson replying, quote, "For the meantime and foreseeable future, all mods by us will no longer be active on this site." End quote. And ultimately, after claiming that there was just one small instance of mistaken lack of attribution, the team left that particular community but stated that they would continue development of the mod. That history will be somewhat important here because it begins to frame that there is at least an alleged instance of stolen or, at bare minimum, mislabeled assets. But now we get to EmergeNYC. This is where I have to say a few things because I'm not sitting here defending the honor of giant corporations. That's an idiotic thing to do, and they don't need my help. They really don't. However, when a small dev team is playing fast and loose, to put it kindly, with this many different companies, it's probably not a sustainable pattern. Might be tomorrow, might be a year from now, might be never, but when you are building your entire game on a foundation constructed by others and failing to actually understand the various pitfalls for that, it's not a reliable way to foster longevity in your growing community. Let's give some examples here. EmergeNYC is overflowing with identical assets to those found in GTA 4. How this happened, I don't know. Why this happened, I don't know, but there are numerous examples of entire buildings, shop combos, and corner stores that are exactly the same as what appears in GTA 4. This could be the result of a licensing deal or a generically purchased asset pack from a store, maybe, but I find that hard to believe when you consider the scope of GTA 4 and, at that time, the extremely limited resources behind EmergeNYC. Furthermore, GTA isn't the only example. It turns out that the game contains straight-up logos from Pizza Hut or McDonald's. I couldn't find this next one myself, but read it elsewhere. Capital One, and the list goes on. These are trademarked, and if you explore the actual legal reality of McDonald's, you'll find that their name, the words, the meal names, the logo, all of it is fairly aggressively copyrighted. So GTA 4 assets, a history of not crediting their sources properly, allegedly, to such an extent that they break away from a modding community entirely as a result, and numerous corporate brands pasted directly into the game. That's a pattern, to be sure, but there's more. Did you know that emergency response sirens are copyrighted? Personally, I had no idea until I looked it up for this particular story, but there is a company called the Federal Signal Corporation, which holds a trademark over pretty much all the sirens you can think of. Most iconically, they are the owners of a fire truck Q signal, which has different variations of course, but is widely recognized by the greater United States population. The thing about simulation games is that they rely on accuracy, and since emergency response vehicles themselves are all extremely well known, these developers decided to replicate them as closely as humanly possible, while not being affiliated in any way with the owners of that copyright. Now, it's possible that they have a licensing contract for some of these models, logos, and sounds, but with the limited scope of their resources, at that time especially, I find it almost completely impossible to imagine that the lion's share of these many different vehicles, logos, and sounds would be legally displayed in this game. But it goes further, and this part is incredibly important because it kind of shakes up the narrative that they're just doing all of this for immersion and for the fans and to make it as realistic as possible. This is super important because it totally branches away from that narrative. Rafael Fernandez also sells, yes, sells, an app on both Android and iPhone, which seems to be a $7 compilation app on its own for the sirens in EmergeNYC. Unless I am completely mistaken, that would mean that he is now packaging and selling Federal Signal Corporation property as its own isolated application for $7. Also, who makes mobile apps that cost $7 just to download? That's absurd. I find myself with a high degree of confidence on this, seeing as in their official Steam video, they even have a screen that explicitly states that all in-game sirens work exactly like the real world. Honestly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I spent maybe 2 hours poking around YouTube looking at gameplay videos, and I found dozens of examples where the game is using clearly copyrighted content that even major AAA video games avoid in their own titles because of licensing requirements. Combine that with the fact that this centers on realism for emergency response, and we can start to understand that an entirely new list of companies becomes relevant, because in the United States, we use vehicles and certain brands for most emergency services that are not federal in totality, they are private. This game is a hornet's nest of allegedly stolen content. If you scroll the reviews on Steam for even 10 seconds, you will find things like this right here, where a user is alleging that the game steals assets from the Arma 3 Ace mod. I can't verify the legitimacy of this one in particular, but when you summarize the existing pattern, it starts to paint a pretty damning picture. A mod created in 2014 and 2015 by the same developers as EmergeNYC comes under fire for what appeared to be a huge list of copied material. Around that same time, they double crowdfunded a new project, which ultimately contains numerous assets from GTA, as well as a whole slew of corporate brands and logos. After that, they copy real-world emergency vehicle sounds, but not just for in-game immersion, right? Like, we've shattered that narrative completely, because the CEO then develops and sells independently those sounds as a $7 iPhone and Android app. Meanwhile, comments on Steam indicate theft from Arma mods or entirely separate games that I'm not even aware of, on top of a growing list of companies who have picture-perfect representations of their copyright in this game, like a very long list. And all of this was gleaned through very little effort and a short span of simply looking over random YouTube gameplay footage. Now, let me be clear, this is not to say that the whole thing should be burnt to the ground, no pun intended. It seems like a fun enough game that genuinely tries to produce depth in a genre that people enjoy, but when you build so much of your foundation on shaky ground, someone has to realize what's happening before you build too high. I'm not here to say that these indie devs should be obliterated by big companies, but there is a very real pattern here. Not just 1 or 2 or 5 examples, but dozens, where the game is using assets they likely should not be. This might be a product of resources or time or direction, I don't know, but in the end, when a game is likely making millions of dollars and doing so with a history and product that is crammed full of things they probably have no legal right to use, I feel like it's worth covering. But that's it. If you want to support, there are links down below. All of my content is available on Odyssey, which is a YouTube platform alternative. I also use Locals. It's like Patreon, but in my opinion better, where you get ad-free and audio podcast versions of all the videos. But to be honest, the market share of Patreon is so damn high. I also have a Patreon page because people just don't like to usually switch platforms. So yeah. Every method of support you can possibly imagine is linked down below in the description. Also another gaming YouTuber to check out, merchandise, social media, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.